Okay, I'd like to call to order the city council work session of Wednesday, September 13th, along with the planning commission and the design review. First on the agenda, we have call to order and approval of agenda.
So move.
Second. Favor?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, we have public comments. Is there anyone that would like to make public comment before we start the meeting? Anyone online? Okay, so we will go ahead and start our first discussion item, which is the code audit joint work session with the planning commission and design review. Hi, would you like to take it away?
Sure. I'm Marcy McAnally, at everybody except, I'm not sure. I was here. Okay. And we have Keith and Keith Leiden and Ethan Rosenthal on Zoom as well to help me go through the agenda. The agenda is to talk about the code rewrite project overall, the whole project that we are actually doing here, and then to focus in on the wetlands overlay. And I wanted to talk about public engagement for the code rewrite. I urged to listen to the good of the order use council sessions back, and it was very useful for me to understand some of the concerns that you're having about the code rewrite, the fact that it appears that nothing is happening, that it's not moving forward, and also the desire to have a robust public engagement. So I want to talk about those things, and I'm not really sure what's the best order to do it. Should we go through the wetlands overlay in detail first, and then cover the larger code rewrite project and the public engagement options later?
I would prefer to cover the wetlands second so that we can have Mickey here for as much, because she did so much work on it along with Mike and myself, that I really feel like she has a lot of valuable input. So if we could.
I do want to start though with the status report on the wetland overlay and sort of like framing the purpose of the materials. The purpose of the materials that we sent you is all of the comments that have been put into that document. And it may have been a little misleading because we have essentially focused in those comments and produced a clean draft. And we've submitted it to DLCD so that we can get the clock running. And what we wanted to talk to you about tonight was specifically, well, generally how we approached it, how we've organized it, and how we've modified it slightly without losing any of the intention behind it. And then spend a little focus time on the development standards section. So the cover memo is intended to frame that discussion, and we can hold off on that. So make his. But I just wanted to let you know that there's a clean draft that's been submitted to DLCP. We have an first urgency hearing on this planning commission hearing on the 26th.
But there were certain things in this draft that you submitted, all the comments that we had comments on too. Like there were certain questions, like sort of saying, I don't like this, or I don't, or do you want to, should it be done this way or that way? So which way was it done in the clean draft? I mean, in other words, there's some things in here that are still ambiguous because of the comments on, on the side. So I don't know what the resolution of those comments was. We have specific ideas about all those comments and specific responses to them concerning what we were hoping to see happen. So I'm not like, for example, the use of the word wetland overlay instead of, wetland and buffer, that kind of thing. There was.
I can see how this would be confusing. I think what would be good is if we can get you the clean copy, which I want to say it's not the final version, but it was intended to be submitted so that we could get the clock going. What's what we would call an 80% draft. We're still working out the development standards details mostly. that would be a more productive place for youth to comment. I wasn't seeking additional comments. My thought is about what we're doing here was we were taking your work, and we've had several meetings with the Wetlands Committee,
Right.
and then we were working to address those internally with the help of an expert ecologist, and also with the help of Keith, looking at it from a code administration and organization point of view. And we previewed that with you, and then we got direction on how to move forward. So that's what we were doing. We're just moving forward. The comments, I can see how they would be confusing because they reflect our own internal question and process. But I don't believe that we needed more direction on those. I think with your direction that you want to make development go through more review, and you still want to have development be permitted, but you want to be really clear about how it's permitted and that it's primarily your goal is to protect the wetlands. I feel that we've moved forward with all of those as our mandate.
Well, when we go through it, then I can show you the places where where it seemed to me there was no decision made. Well, I guess we'll just wait till we go through the document. Is that okay?
Do you have the cover memo that describes that's this. What's that?
Yes.
An extension of it, and then it goes on for a couple
Mhm.
of pages.
Right.
It would be helpful if we could frame kind of our focus on those topics in that order, if possible, but I'm open to a free-form discussion too when we get to that point.
Okay.
When that's submitted, do they realize it's at 80%?
Yes.
Okay,
It's very common
okay.
for this to happen. But I also don't feel that we're very far away from having a final version. We're really focused on the development standards, which say precisely what you can do in the wetlands and how you have to document what you're doing, and also how you can provide mitigation. So if you do development, you are also improving the wetland. That's in a way the hardest part of the code. But you gave us a lot of good work, and we've reorganized it so that it's a model version of what we think is the best organized version of the code. Since this is in fact the first effort of the code rewrite project, we wanted to model our best practices that we're going to apply to the whole code rewrite. We also appreciate that the intention was clear, especially after we interviewed you.
Okay.
So none of that is lost.
We love the reordering. I mean, we have no complaint there or anything. There was just, when we get to it, I'll just show you, and maybe we misunderstood what some of these comments are meant.
Sure.
And so when we get there, I have it all written down.
Good. I'm just nervous because it sounds like, are there hundreds? Or are we talking?
Actually, it's every single comment you made, we had some response to. And so, but there are certain ones that are the most important that I will bring up and just see. And we may have misunderstood and thought that you were trying to change something that we intended to remain. So it may just be a misunderstanding of the form of how this was. So
I'm really good discussion.
Yeah.
You think and keep it here, and they're the ones who mostly commented. But you would have seen Bill Kabison's comments too, I think, in this.
Mhm.
Okay. So can we set this aside, and when is Mickey likely to be here?
She's hopefully will be here by phone at 7. If she's not, I spent a couple hours on the phone with her today, going through all of our comments and wrote down everything she said. So, and everything I had to say. So I've got it all here.
Well, so before we talk about the code rewrite project overall and the different options that we could investigate and discuss here about public engagement, should we throw anything else into the agenda right at this moment?
I don't think so. Anybody have anything?
All right, so I do want to address this kind of appearance that maybe nothing has been happening on the code rewrite. And maybe that's true because I took a 2.5-week vacation for the first time in actually my whole career, 2.5 weeks. But things have been a little bit slow because of summer. And the wetlands overlay has taken a lot of our energy and time of the people who have been working over the summer. And I just want to say that it has slowed us down. However, the first step of the code rewrite project, as you recall, was to produce a policy neutral reorganized version of it. And we're going to be bringing that forward for adoption. It should be uncontroversial because it's not changing any of the meaning of the code. It's just reorganizing it into it's eliminating duplication. It's making it much simpler to refer to. And the reason we have to adopt it is so that then we can actually go in and track change, edit it. And I've talked about this before, so stop me if I don't need to say it again. That step includes a renaming of the administrative procedures, that doesn't change the way the administrative procedures are applied or work. It's just a slight renaming lexicon so that we can go forward with because it makes the amendment simpler. The hardest part of the code rewrite project overall is going to be, addressing the shape and size of buildings, the village character, the housing, how we zone to allow housing, and now with the wetland overlay, it will be incorporated how development takes shape. And if I could remind you of the village character survey that we went through in the beginning phase of this project, a lot of the issues that arose during that process, we will be addressing in that second phase of the code rewrite. But we need to get through this first phase of reorganizing and adopting the code. We're hoping that we can get that done, that we can bring to you the reorganized code in October when we meet with you. Okay, so October is a little, there are things happening in October. We will probably have the first evidentiary hearing for the wetland overlay. We'll have on the 16th a joint commission meeting like this, specifically about the reorganized code. And then that will go forward for adoption as well. So I understood from listening to watching the video of that I think it was September 5th, that it's time for us to talk about public engagement. So this afternoon I spent some time talking with staff about the way that's been done on other projects that I heard mentioned in the meeting, like the June project. Is that the way it's described?
Yes.
And the elementary school more recently, that there was people felt good about some of the public engagement around this. For example, the June project sounded like it was the facts. Let's lay out the facts. Let's have the public understand the facts, and also all the members of the commissions understand the facts. Then let's take that, and that's not just like a one-off thing. There's a process to get to that point. I acknowledge. But then going out to the public with some discussion options about those facts, and then having testimony until testimony is exhausted. I understood that the June project actually took testimony for several hearings in a few months. And then with that information in place, council was able to make a decision about what to do. I think a similar project would work here too. And then I think I also heard that the elementary school project had some good aspects to it. Maybe you can remind me, was that the survey? Was there a survey or was it public meetings?
The City Hall project survey had decent results from that one. The Cannon Beach Elementary survey wasn't quite as robust. But the city hall one did, there was, I think, the 2 community outreaches and the surveys, there was over 50 submitted.
Okay. So I was wondering if we could maybe I could get guidance from you about a combination of all those things. The survey that we did for the village character, I thought that was very well responded to. It's pretty high response rate for a city of this size. And I wouldn't replace public engagement, like in-person public engagement with a survey, but I think it could be a good way to reach out to people who might not come to a roundtable discussion. So putting that out there, but I'm also wondering, do you want to do this quickly? Like one way to do a public engagement effort would be to have the forwarding process, but accelerated into like a week or in a month. And it gets, there's some advantages to that. There's a buzz created and more people sometimes get involved because it's happening and it builds attention on the project. Or do you want to do it more spread out over months? I know that you are dealing with a lot of projects. And so another way to do that would be more intermittently on a monthly basis, incorporating community feedback.
I'd like to see it done in a more consolidated way.
Yeah, I would.
Like the idea of the buzz being created and getting people here. I think that when we have these long breaks between things, people forget what was said at the last meeting, or they lose enthusiasm. So I like the idea of, and I felt like the Four Dunes thing, it did seem kind of accelerated to me. I took part in it. I mean, it did stretch out, but still there was always a lot of energy about it associated with it happening.
How long do you recall this Four Dune project?
Well, it seemed like we were here every night for weeks.
Every night is the,
Was it about a month? Were you here, Bruce, at the time? I think you were. It was about a month, didn't we? Wasn't it over about a month?
yeah,
A little less than a month, and then the council met probably 2 months later to make decisions.
I think it was before, I think it was earlier than 2 months.
I think it
It
was
seems
too.
like it was too.
Yeah, I think we had it over a month, and I think probably within a couple of weeks after that, 2 or 3 weeks after that, we had a decision. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was fast and it was
sorry.
dense. I guess is my,
Yeah, we had several meetings within a month. Probably a meeting a week at least,
yeah,
That's what
at
Yeah.
least, yeah. And we had it at Tolovana Inn. And because we expected a big crowd, and we did get a big crowd. And then we had it, the rest of them were here. And we probably want to keep them here because of the monitors that we have now.
And we also had big crowds here.
Yeah, yeah, they were
Yeah.
filled.
Play as a sand.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Clay, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I don't remember the specific, I do remember a consolidated timeline around the actual presentations. I also remember quite a long run up to get to the place where they were ready for that. I think we'd want to be careful about the scope. If we brought all of these different, maybe Marcy, you could help me with this. If we have all of these different issues that are important coming together over 1 week, and we have 5, 10, whatever the number of different topics we're addressing that all have these long runways for people to get up to speed on, wetlands in and of itself is a pretty important topic. Maybe that can be broken down succinctly into an hour seminar or something. Affordable housing, the downtown corridor, these different big potentially controversial items we're talking about could take a lot of time to prepare specialists, and I would be concerned about having a lot of different processes running concurrently and that just being really challenging. One, from a timing standpoint, actually having something in front of people that we can move forward on, and two, just from a contention standpoint, it could be a lot for people to take in. And I'm not saying we don't, it's just something to talk about. The other would be, you know, for example, we're talking about wetlands tonight. Maybe we break it up where we're talking about these different segments, and that's over a week or 3 days or something. Or maybe that's too much, but I think it's something we should talk about. That's
Yeah, I
all.
think you have a good point there because we have so many different things that we're looking at. But I think whatever subject we're talking about at the time, we need to have it concentrated and focused so that we know, you know, so everybody has their chance to talk about it and then deal with it and then move on.
That's kind of what I meant, was having, like, I was thinking of just the wetlands, actually, having that having that a dense thing and then moving on to something else that's, but not talking about wetlands 1 month and then talking about it a month later and then talking about it a month later, but having it all together and then talking about housing all together, with,
I think, let me just paint a picture of what we're producing in step 2 of this project. Our scope says, after we get through this policy neutral reorganization adoption, that we identify a potential list of amendments to the code, including policy and form amendments. This is a long list of things that includes the things that we've already talked about during the code audit, in the village character discussion and in the public benefits discussion. And when we talk about housing, it's all that stuff. Specific code approaches that we would take to each of those. And I anticipate that we're going to have a longer list of things that we want to accomplish during this code rewrite than can actually be accomplished. But so and our scope actually anticipated that and said that there's a prioritization process. So we check off the set that we're going to actually adopt through the code rewrite and then set aside the others for future action. So it's the prioritization process is something that you can involve the community in and then make the final decision yourselves. That would help us move through that phase. I think, really good community involvement and with really good information provided to you so you can make the best decision that you can. Does that make sense? It's always hard to talk about. We're not talking about a wetland chapter. I don't think that that's how the conversation with the community should go. It's going to be because every part of the code pulls on another part. So you have to frame these questions a little bit as trade-offs. If you do this to the wetland will be a done thing by that point. But this means it is for housing. And how do we make a decision about how to, for example, on housing, picture that one of the choices that we're presenting is should we change the zoning code for housing in different zones or different neighborhood or different context areas differently? Or is it a across the board change to allow certain types of housing? That might be a policy choice that you have to provide guidance to us before we can amend the code appropriately. And that's where you might want the public to understand that question that you're struggling with and weigh in on it. So to the point that was just made, we do have to put some thought into that before we take it out to the public. I don't think we're going to be able to do that like before the holidays, but we can work on it. And January is a good time to have that kind of a public engagement. That's a little bit of the schedule that I'm thinking about.
I'm sorry. Okay. And when are you seeing the public engagement for the wetlands portion?
At your hearing in October.
Okay.
When you say prioritization, what do you mean by that?
Well, we might not be able to address all of your top items in this code rewrite under the timeline of the conditions that we've set. It may be that, I don't know, something like downtown parking. I mean, we might be able to say that we can reduce, reducing parking requirements is something that we've talked about. It's a need. You cannot build you cannot rebuild a lot of your existing buildings downtown unless you rethink that. Right now, what you have in your code is a vestige of kind of suburban planning practice. And I know you're also, talking about, I noticed from watching the parking generally and parking permitting. And those are bigger, longer steps, but in terms of a first step that the code might be able to undertake would be reducing parking requirements in the downtown. Later steps might be eliminating them for certain areas or setting up a parking benefit district or that is kind of tied to paid parking. Those are longer term parking strategies. So that would be something that it might be a priority to get to the end state on parking, but we can't do that all in the code rewrite.
So when you say priorities, are you saying priorities in terms of the kind of topics we want to deal with and when we want to deal with those, or in what order we want to deal with those?
Yes.
Okay. And are you going to be giving us those topics to shuffle around?
My proposal to you is that we would give you a starting set from the previous work that we've done, and then we would add to it together.
Does it make sense to break up some of the priorities within some of the committees that it might pertain to? I know the larger share would probably go to the planning commission, but if we, had DRB take on some of the components of the ordinances that, and then we could come back, maybe even the Parks Committee could get involved with some of the tree ordinances, just to kind of get different things moving. If that makes sense, or if it's.
What would their role be? Would it be?
Well, I guess I'm just thinking, that all the committees could, just some of the ordinances that pertain, I know that the Parks Committee doesn't see any of this, and just splitting it up, among some of the committees to bring back.
Yeah, I think in their work, they're identifying issues that would be nice to resolve. And whether that becomes a priority or not.
Right.
So maybe a role that they could play would be taking the initial set of the wish list out, maybe, or this within their topic area, that list to their interest group. And they kind of help host the public engagement with that topic. That could work.
Dorian, did you want to say something?
I think that what Anita is saying is something I believe we're already doing. I mean, the planning commission created that social group about wetlands. We have the same social group for trees. And there's a unofficial social group on the dark skies ordinance. So I think those things are already happening and have been happening for a while now. But I think it's a good idea to continue them as we can to kind of condense the amount of time this is going to take to come to fruition.
Right.
Because it sounds like it's going to be months before the public even gets to be engaged, if we're talking about January.
But have those social groups reported anything back to, like the work on the trees? Has the Parks Committee heard any?
Yes, the Parks Committee is actually, there is representation on the Parks Committee.
No, I know, I understand that, but have they reported, has your group reported back to the committee?
We're
This close?
this close to reporting.
Okay.
One of our group members was away for 5 weeks. So
Okay.
that really kind of.
Right.
Barb, that will be in the go to the order later. We'll bring that up. Perhaps have a working session within the next month on that very topic.
But it's the tree group is just, we're making a wish list of what we'd like to see in the tree ordinance. That, we're not trying to organize it
Right.
under the new reorganized code.
No,
We're not,
we're
we're
cleaning
just,
up the
we're saying what we'd like to see in the tree ordinance, basically. And taking it back to the whole group.
So that's what
see
you're saying?
if-
I'm trying to figure out if there's, parts of this ordinance that we could give to the distinct committees that might be affected or might come before them so that they can weigh in and sort of, I guess, get this process moving along.
I just think.
Not just another, off group that I don't know who's on the tree committee. And then they're gonna come to the Parks Committee, but I don't know that the Parks Committee really has any say. So that's where I'm not quite sure about that, but, housing would be Planning Commission. I'm not quite sure what Design Review Board might, maybe some of the downtown ordinances that would go back to the Planning Commission, but just having the committees, get involved in some of the things that they oversee in the ordinances.
Well, very often in these projects, we will take a aspect of the code to like a focus group. But the consultant is leading that discussion. It would be after we have decided what that wish list, the long wish list is, and how we want to frame the issues or the trade-offs. So some time does need to be spent on making sure we ask the right question, because this is a code rewrite. It's not a planning or visioning project. We have to change the code so it works well for this topic area. But we could use these groups as our focus group. We could take this set of questions to them and spend, a workshop with them. That'd be very helpful.
Right.
I see the committees adding to the wish list.
Well, once the priorities, I guess, I don't know if you decide 3 or 5 or something, and then see if you can, get those two committees to review and make recommendations and just accelerate this. So people feel like 3 years waiting and we're still on wetlands.
I think we're going to be done with wetlands, hopefully in October or November.
Right.
And so I'm not, and that was just a long process, but I see the code more as a holistic thing, not all these little sections, except for the couple things that we identified in the council and in the planning commission as priorities. Emergencies, in other words, and that was wetlands, and that was trees. And I'm not sure if it was dark skies. I think maybe it was with the planning commission, but those things were identified as something that had to be done separately fast. And then, I want to be I want to be a part of all of it. I don't want, a committee, I don't see how you can't take housing out and not have zoning be part of it and be, and the whole look of the city being part of it. I don't see how you can separate those things out.
I'm not saying separate
committees.
Everybody, has a job to do, and then we all get together and talk about what we, as a committee, discussed and brings to the table.
Well, and that could be done with a joint meeting. The city council and the Parks Committee could meet on trees. And
but we all meet once a month, and so that's where
it would be
the Design Review Board, definitely has time to look at some of the.
Harvey?
We have a special meeting.
Yes.
So is this a
used to it.
organization or restructuring of the codes, or is it an upgrade, upgrade of the quality of the codes?
Both. Very much both.
Both, okay.
Yeah, I want to just dwell on that for just a second, because the whole code, going through the whole code rewrite is rare. We talked about this during the code audit process. The tendency for cities is to to fix a section of the code, to maybe to make it comply or to address an emergency. And then you get this kind of hodgepodge of parts that don't all fit together. The goal for this project from the beginning was to top to bottom audit and rewrite. And I want to emphasize that we should hold to that. It's rare, it's hard to do, obviously, because there are emergencies all the time and priorities. But we should try to, we've gotten this far. We should try to get to the end of the code rewrite project.
I guess maybe that's where I'm getting confused when you say rewrite, but it's really a reorganization.
And it's upgrading all of the sections of the code that don't comply or any of them don't implement your comprehensive plan adequately. The code is several decades old, and it's been amended in parts, but it's never been reconceived as a whole document.
So do you, and in your staff, do you have on board wetlands experts in this
We
case?
brought them on board just for this project. We brought one and he's here at this meeting tonight. Yeah.
Clay, I'm sorry, Clay, did you want to say something?
Yeah, and this kind of goes along with, I think this goes along with some things I'm hearing. First of all, yes, Marcy, it is a big undertaking to rewrite a whole code, and I want to get it done yesterday too. There's some really important things that need to be taken care of that are involving wetlands or trees, workforce housing. But if we're going to do it top to bottom, it's going to take a little time. One thing I was just thinking about was the presentation we had a few months back on sand management, on dune management. That was really educational for me. And I sat through a number of the presentations when we actually did make changes to the dune management plan. But having the different organizations come together and present to us really opened my eyes in terms of how to think about that particular item, which will be a part of our reorganization. What if, as a part of our social groups, or however we're going to label them, we were either bringing people in, or Marcy, maybe you bring people in and have them talk to us broadly about, and that may be what we're going to do here tonight with Ethan, broadly about the item that we're talking about, wetlands, for example. Give us some ideas of how to think about wetlands beyond the extensive research that our members have done, and the public the chance to hear it too. Not just so it's not just a social committee, but it's also a joint meeting where the public can be involved in that way. And then we're not only educating ourselves in how to think about these items and how to legislate or prepare legislation for, or not legislation, rules and regulations for them, but we're giving the public an opportunity as well. Maybe that's kind of I don't know if that's a hybrid or what we're talking about, but I think that maybe adding that component would be one way to bring the public along with us. So we don't slam them with 16 different items in a week or two that are all going to be incredibly, many of them could be very complicated, and a few of them will be very contentious. That's it.
Well, we were already given, we've already given a mandate by the Planning Commission and the council to go ahead and work on the wetlands ordinance, get that section in place because we deemed it to be an emergency type section. So that's what all this work has been for, and that's what we've been doing. And it is going to involve public engagement because in October, we're going to have public engagement. It's already been turned into the state. So we are moving forward on that. That was a separate thing from the whole rest of the code. We deemed it should be separate because we deemed it to be an emergency.
I think we just follow that model right along. I mean, we have the opportunity for people to hear tonight more about about wetlands, both how the council and planning commission are thinking about it, but also the specialist, Ethan. And we could look at doing the same on these other issues. That's the only thing I'm saying. So let's maybe follow that same model with some of these other items we're talking about.
I think that's a great idea. Yes. Anybody else?
Well, I like Clay's idea. It may be too late for the wetlands, but if we, like when we're doing housing, if we could get some of the housing experts here to talk about, I mean, from the state, what's required, from the county, what they're doing, if we could get some of those people together and have a public presentation about what we need to be thinking about when we're doing, for instance, the housing portion of the zoning code, that might get us at least started in the discussions. And that way we might be farther ahead when we're actually writing the new code. And if we can get public participation at the same time, that will give us a groundwork to work from. And then once we develop it, take it back to the public and say, what do you think?
If you're calling,
So wetlands, one of five key areas that we were looking at as priorities. I mean, with housing obviously being the other one.
I feel have the list in front of me, but it is housing, parking,
Yeah, it was
wetlands,
housing, parking, trees.
wetlands, housing.
more education is always good.
This is back.
Now, if we, addressing housing in our community is going to be different in another community. So, but we need to know what the different, parameters are, what the different options are. And so having information given to us or things to read or experts come in and talk, that's always good for everything. I don't see how getting more information can ever be bad.
We do probably need to limit the number of things that we would have experts come and speak on. I mean, but that list, those would be good topics to have someone come and speak about each of those. There are people who can talk about downtown parking, management and codes. And housing it's one that's, a lot of people are available to talk about, especially at the state now. Tree ordinances is a really hot topic, and no city that I've seen has gotten it right yet. I'd be challenged to find the right person, but I mean, maybe that's what we want to hear from, is perhaps how different cities have adopted a tree ordinance and the struggles they're having with it or something.
Right.
There might be a way to treat that topic.
But they're available. I mean, the tree group has 2 or 3 ordinances that we're looking at as models and taking parts of those to see what we think would work in this community and then bringing it back to everybody to see what they think. But everyone has to be willing to do all the reading and go through all those ordinances and see what they say. I mean, seriously,
Yeah,
otherwise, is everyone willing to do that, to pour through the tree ordinance for, 3 different jurisdictions?
And there's certainly a lot of passion behind some of those things. My concern is I don't see equal passion for getting in and tackling housing. I think we all know it's an issue. We're all concerned about it, but I don't see the passion as there is for wetlands and trees.
But
So-
we need to.
Yes, I know we do.
Need to be passionate.
I think everybody's aware of that.
That gets pushed and pulled.
Mhm.
I mean, this is a bit of the struggle that we're having with the wetland ordinance right now, is we want to permit development in the wetland buffer, but it needs to be, according to our goal here, it needs to be appropriate to the wetlands. And trees, similarly, we want to have housing, but we also want to save trees. But at some point, you can't do all of those things. You have to
Right.
carefully weigh them against each other. And I am a little worried when I think about having presentations about these topics like individually, because the short shrift is that, well, maybe the last thing that gets addressed is, we saved the trees and we've made it better for the wetlands in their when people develop there. Oh, what about housing? It can't be addressed as a last item.
You said that better than me.
I think that everybody here is concerned about housing.
Well, to Marcy's point that if we enact regulations that prohibit housing in certain areas, it's counterproductive. I believe that's the point.
Well, it can be, you can limit housing, yes.
Well, yes, but then there is a trade-off. If you're going to save sensitive lands, you're going to have to limit housing on them. Or have stiffer regulations for them. You can't have it both ways. You can't have housing in multifamily housing in wetlands and save the wetlands. It's not going to happen.
But I would say that the next sentence might be, then we look at where we can get housing.
Yes.
Right, exactly.
And how, and that's controversial. I mean, just like everything that we're talking about.
Of course it is. There's a lot of ideas floating around amongst different people here about where would be good areas to concentrate more housing. But I'm just saying is you don't not have in regulations for sensitive areas because you have to have housing. They're not mutually exclusive.
I don't believe that they are either. I mean, we've done projects where we say more than the required number of trees and we double the density on the development. It can be done. It can be done.
And then you're changing the character of the city. And that's
Completely.
another thing you have to consider. I think when you say that there's not passion about housing, I think that you might be misjudging the passion. I think it may not be the passion you would like, but there's a lot of passion about housing and how it's going to affect the city.
There's a lot of passion. I don't see a social group out there. Working,
We're honestly tapped out. If you would like to create a social group, I'm sure there's people who would be happy to join you. Seriously.
I realize, yes, I could probably do that.
Right. Lisa is on 2 social groups, right?
Yeah.
They were created because people asked for that. I think that there would probably be people who would be delighted to join you in a social group about housing and looking at the housing ordinance. But it can't always be the same people.
Understood.
This is Mickey Moritz. Could I make a comment?
Hey, Mickey.
Hi, Mickey.
Sorry I was late. And I realized I just jumped into the middle of a really, really important conversation. I would raise the point that when we think about, for instance, wetlands and land available, there isn't that much buildable land on wetland lots of record in the city. So if we're talking about bang for our buck, I think there are probably other spaces where we really need to focus our attention on increasing multifamily housing, making sure that it's affordable, making sure that it's not a vacation home or a short-term rental. So I agree, we need to take a holistic view of the city and we need to say, how do we make sure this happens? But in terms of how much land is wetland, it's not that much of the city. So I don't know that saying let's build on wetlands is going to be a particularly large part of the housing solution. That's it.
And I don't think anybody's saying that, but no, your point is exactly correct. As we start to limit potential multifamily housing, we should be looking at where it's appropriate to expand multifamily housing.
But workforce is not housing, for housing, it doesn't always have to be multi-family.
Right.
No, I mean, there's
Full spectrum
of needs.
Yeah.
as I've always heard you talk about, so.
Right. Not a apartment building, but a cluster of houses.
Just an apartment, might, but it also involves clusters. So,
I see that his hand is still up, is up.
First of all, I want to say, Gary, if you want to form that social club, I stand there with you. I have a little expertise in that field and can tell you one of the reasons we probably don't have a lot of momentum is it is such a complicated, I mean, I make a living in this world and it is so complicated. I can't imagine it's something people even begin to know where to start on how to meaningfully address it. So that's another reason I thought maybe having someone come in and speak to us just to get us thinking in a different way than we do in our lives ordinarily, or even when it's in front of us every day. Have some experts come in, give us some ideas, and we can run with them. So anyway, do strongly believe we need to address housing in our community and want to be a part of helping it. So member number 2, Gary, ready to go.
Well, and I think we have an expert in housing here working with us. So how can we use you more?
We get to the code rewrite part of this.
Yeah.
Claire, thanks.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts about public engagement that we should add into the mix? Or should we have Mickey here? Here's what I think about what we, some ideas like speaker series on topics, a limited number of topics that we do that for. Not if you kind of like, let me know if I have any people who agree with this general direction. Do it in a compressed time frame. Perhaps follow the 4 Dunes process where there was the facts laid out by an expert, and then to engage the public, inform and engage the public. And there were some events to do that. And then there was testimony taken, and then there was this decision made by direction developed by the council, that we follow that general process, but we try to do it perhaps in a more accelerated time space. So,
And October will be wetlands. We'll put that one to bed.
yes,
Okay, in October.
so I can come back to you with some specific pictures of how we might be able to accomplish these things or options. We can talk about it again.
Good, thank you. Everybody okay with that?
Mhm.
Okay, let's go to wetlands.
Marcy, could you reiterate what you had said at the beginning about where we were on the wetlands ordinance so Mickey can hear it as well?
Yes, welcome, Mickey. I want to say that what we're starting from in this meeting is the agenda cover memo, which describes what we have done, the draft that you provided to us. And I want to walk through how we've reorganized it and edited it and done some things to it. But I want to assure you that none of the content has substantially changed. The intention hasn't changed. We felt at the end of August or the beginning of August that we were pretty clear on your intention and direction through several meetings that we had with the working group or the social group. And so we moved forward to conduct these steps that are described in the cover memo. Where we are, where it is less finished is at the development standards chapter, and that we have some specific framing or informing. We want to tell you how we're approaching that section and basically get your nod on that. And then another update is that we have submitted the draft, the clean version, not this messy all comments version, to the DLCD. And we have set the clock for the hearing, and we have a hearing scheduled for the Planning Commission on October 26th. Is that everything you guys should?
So it seems that, Mickey, that it doesn't seem to me that they're looking for our feedback on all of the comments in the margins now. Am I right about that?
Well, I think what we could do is go through each of these points that we've, to tell you what we've done to this document. And if things come up, you can't tell how we've addressed that, we can talk about your comments. But I'm kind of hoping that we'll go through this and you'll say, if they've moved in that direction, they probably addressed my comments, our comments.
Okay, when can we see a clean copy?
Yeah, I'm sorry that we didn't send it to you. We should have sent it to you when it was submitted to, actually today, to the pop-up notification. Absolutely, we can get that to you tonight.
Okay, that'd be great.
Becky, do you have any questions?
No, let's go ahead and move forward with your agenda.
I'm wondering if I want to pass it over to Keith, or Keith, I can go through the cover memo process that you've taken to go through. I can describe it. What would you prefer?
Why don't you go ahead and then I'll interject or comment after you're done.
Okay, I'm just going to walk you through the cover memo. We started with how we reorganized it. That was the first step. Most of this work was done by Keith. The revised outline was reviewed by the committee. First of all, we did reorganize it. You might remember that, and we submitted that reorganization outline with staff and the committee. So that's you will see that organization reflected in the clean copy. I know it's hard to see it in this copy, but things were moved around and you should be able to see that. Then the text was edited to eliminate any duplication and also to identify definitions. And some narrative was added to strengthen the wetland overlay chapter. All the deletions and additions that were done as part of that step are shown in that next draft. So the organization is, and I'm going to go through the sections and describe them. It starts with the purpose statements. So to us, the purpose statement of the committee draft was retained and the regulatory portions were relocated elsewhere. So for example, the definitions moved to a new section 1743.015. So then that's the next section, definitions. And what happened to that was we recommend definitions that ultimately go to 1704 I think in the code rewrite when it happens, that those would move to that chapter. The new definitions are proposed or as noted. Really, and when I say proposed, we would like to go forward with this unless we hear otherwise. As noted, to clarify permitted activities. So do you want to talk about that point a little bit, Keith, your definition that were proposed to clarify permitted activities?
Yes, so in the draft that you have in the packet, the terms in yellow were used in the draft provided by the committee, but it wasn't clear exactly what those meant. So we just thought that we should have definitions for those terms, so then the meaning is more clear.
Would it help if we had the document on the screen?
Yeah.
Possibly if somebody can manage to go through it in these sections that we're talking about them, yeah. Although, do you think? Do people have black and white printed copies? So they can't see what's yellow when he's talking about what's yellow.
No, I have color copy.
You have a color copy.
Like 1, 2. Yeah.
I think that mail it.
Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you.
Okay.
While we're getting resituated, there was another date, I think in October. 6th, what did I get right? The 16th?
Yes.
And that's when the rewrite will be available.
We'll talk to you about the reorganizing.
And that's October 16th.
Yes.
Okay.
And that was the date we just talked about today, so we hadn't even sent an email out. So the next joint code audit, out of the dates we had held off for council, we wanted to do it on October 16th. So we'll send at the end of the night, we'll send an email to everybody.
Thank you. That's probably why I was confused.
Yeah, we just talked about it this afternoon.
Can people see that? Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions about what Keith was just saying about the definitions? New definitions are proposed. I think there's a point here, Keith, where you say may need to modify wetland definition per Department of State lands. That's still a thing that we have to deal with. That Ethan is helping.
Correct.
Any questions?
I think there were a couple of places as I looked through the definitions that raised some big picture issues that maybe we address here, maybe at a different time. Should we do that offline or should we do that as a large group?
I think we should do it as a large group. That's what we want
So-
right now.
So for instance, the original code had protected wetlands as a different term than just wetlands. My suggestion would be that we remove that term altogether, because really what we are saying is that if a wetland is in the local wetland inventory, it is subject to these requirements. So my suggestion would be to run through the entire code, remove the word protected, and take that out of the definition section.
Are there any issues with that, Ethan or Keith?
I
don't have an issue here. Sorry. And I'll apologize in advance. My internet is breaking up every once in a while, so I might have to be dropping out and coming back in, but no issue here. Sorry, Keith.
I don't think so. I'll just have to take a look at that. So we'll follow through on that and see where that leads. But
Okay,
that
thanks.
sounds fine.
And I think we probably will get into this a little bit later, but I think that there's still some confusion about the term wetland lot of record. I know we touched on this at our last joint session because it seemed like there were some questions from your team in terms of what was our intention with that term. It is a term that was in the original code, and we were largely trying to not change anything we didn't have to change. In seeing some of the comments in your draft that you sent to us, I'm guessing there may be some confusion around that term. And so that may require some rethinking or at least clarification.
Yeah, I guess, Keith, do you have any comment about that? Did we just retain that term or did you retain it on purpose?
We retained it for now, and I think we may want to take a look at what that means exactly, particularly when we start looking at what's permitted and what's not permitted in wetlands and buffer areas, and see if we want to fine tune or amend how you deal with these situations.
I remember that Bill Kavaisman brought that up, the use of the term lot of record. I believe that was one of his comments.
Yeah.
So that may be a discussion we need to hone over time, but let's flag it as something that seems to be raising some confusion.
And Mickey, we had talked about tying the definition of wetlands. Some of our wetlands might not meet the state's criteria, biological criteria. Do we have to be tied to this? We have our own delineation. Can't we? Do we have to be tied to the state's definition?
Right. So I think that what Lisa and I discussed was that when we talk about wetlands here, as the original code did, we are talking about those defined in the local wetland inventory for Cannon Beach. Right. We're not trying to create a jurisdictional comparison to state or federal jurisdiction. I think that keeps it much cleaner and easier for someone who owns one of these lots to just say, is there a wetland in the local wetland inventory on my property? Am I within a buffer for one of these wetlands? And we're not going to try to cross-reference federal or state jurisdiction unless DSL tells us we must.
I feel like that might be a little bit confusing. So if I'm a property owner and I see that there's an LWI wetland mapped on my property, how do I just have to accept the boundary that's on that map?
No,
or
you then get a delineation done. And as has been done by every property that the Planning Commission has reviewed recently, that delineation is generally accepted by the planning department of the city, and that replaces what is in the LWI for that wetland.
Right. I guess just that piece, it seems like you still want it to be clear that the applicant is conducting the wetland delineation based on the state's requirements. I would
It
think,
should be
otherwise,
done in accordance with the standards for conducting a delineation. Is that what you're saying?
yeah,
Yes, and I think that's
Yeah.
what we envision in the way that we define,
okay,
for instance, who conducts it with what manual, and if that needs to be clarified, that would be fine. But what we're trying to avoid is saying, is this a significant wetland according to state law? We're just saying, this is a wetland that is a defined wetland in our local wetland inventory and is therefore subject to this wetland overlay zone.
okay.
That change anything about that definition then? Does that definition that's struck? I'm sorry, maybe it's not even there. We may need to
No.
modify.
Right. So I think that was just my point, that we wanted to clarify and crystallize what the thought was behind how we're defining what wetlands fall within this wetland overlay zone. And then the team can make sure that what is here is consistent. Assuming, of course, that the rest of City Council and Planning Commission agree.
And where that came from, where we questioned it was on page 3 under comment ER11. That's where that came from. You see what I'm referring to? Yeah, that's why that's what sort of gave us the motivation to question it.
Okay with the that the DSL definition only applies to the delineation, but the wetland is as defined by the local wetland inventory.
Right. The wetland is defined by the wetland local inventory, but if somebody questions it, then they can get a professional delineation.
That is conducted according to the departments.
Yeah.
Yeah, that works for me. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Great. So the next section I want to talk about is mapping. That Keith says this is relatively unchanged, but he was trying to clarify the relationship between the city's local wetland inventory and any subsequent delineations and determinations. So kind of like we were just talking about. He says the delineation should modify the city's local wetland inventory because it's more current and site specific. The wording proposed by the committee isn't very clear about what happens to the official city map once is available. So this is a thing that needs to happen. Keith, is that correct? Or it is as shown in your document?
I think so. And if I was following Mickey, it would be that way, that you do a site-specific delineation, and then that essentially replaces what you have in the LWI for that property.
Yes, that would be our expectation. I think that's
Yeah.
how it has worked historically.
Okay.
But
So my point was to just make sure that's clear in the code that that's how that works then, if you do it.
But the city can also has the ability to get its own wetlands expert. Is that true or not? In other words, oh, okay, never mind. It's just that they're experts and they're experts. And so if somebody hires an expert to do a delineation and, the planning department thinks that the delineation, that a different expert might make a different delineation because the delineation is it's like an expert for hire.
Right. Well, I suppose it would just need to be something where you say that's a delineation that's accepted by the city in some way.
Right. In other words,
I think
that is-
C does C.
that's what
D does that.
C, I think.
O2OD. I think it got changed to D, at least in what we were sent.
It did.
Because I think there was something that indicates that if the city has questions, that we could hire someone to also.
I just wanted to make sure that was still in there. Okay.
Yes.
Where is it? It's in D now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Delineation or determination is prepared and accepted by the city. The mapping it contains shall replace.
Oh,
the town beach.
right. The city has the opportunity to review and seek outside opinion. how can we accomplish this is what I had asked, but this accomplishes it.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so. Mapping, what else do we have?
I had a question on E. So, and maybe my letters are wrong, I'm not sure. The D talks about, that a wetland study is good for 5 years. And then the next section talks about continued reliance on something for over 5 years. Why is that section in there? Why don't we just say it's no longer delineated and you need to redo the delineation, because it's older than 5 years? Why are we allowing them to even rely on a previous one? It seems to me like it's kind of contradicting one another. In one sense, it's saying a maximum of 5 years. And then in the next section, it talks about if it's older than 5 years, then these things need to happen.
And the practice has been that we don't accept anything over 5 years.
Yeah, I think we should get rid of that.
Sure, I think that's fine. What we were doing, I think, is relying on the old code here. And I think it was just supposed to make life a little simpler for the applicant, but you are right. Wetlands change. Why not simply make that a clean rule that doesn't have this confusing different
Much easier
criteria?
to administer.
And that's, I would say that's similar to what DSL requires. They do allow you to kind of resubmit, if you have an approved delineation, it's 5 years old or expiring, you can kind of submit for a renewal, but for the most part, they ask you to recollect all the same information. So I think it'd probably be fine to just say, yeah, just submit a new report.
Just sticking to that E for a moment, which is a struck through D. And Keith's note was clarify what's meant in subsection ER regarding protected wetlands. So if we strike that, I guess we don't have that question anymore, Keith.
I don't think so.
The only other problem though, 1, 2, and 2A, B, C, D, all those go along with that items, right? So it's the entire section E and B.
Yeah, I was thinking that because you're asking for them to provide a new wetland survey that's already required to meet what we need in the, what we require anyways.
Okay.
So I was thinking that would just get eliminated because they're going to have to do it anyways.
Okay, cool.
I don't know if,
And all of it.
yes.
1, 2, through 3A through C, and those two sections, they all get struck.
Could I ask a quick question? Really of Robert, probably, you're the expert. When we get a wetland, a new delineation, we don't physically change the wetland on our mapping system, do we? And isn't that what this is asking for?
So we do not generally have the capability to update the GIS because we receive a paper copy only, with one exception. That exception has been the Forest Lawn, where we've received a GIS shapefile. If we update, as this is proposing, the language to include that mapping information, then we'll have that capability to do that going forward.
Okay, so from your perspective, it's doable as long as you're given.
Correct.
Okay.
That's why that says any wetland delineation to the city shall be accompanied by an electronic shapefile.
Yep.
That'd be great.
So that takes care of that for what you're.
So on to the next section, if we could, applicability. So this is a new.
Could I ask one more
Yeah.
question? What does F mean?
It says protected wetlands that are legally filed under this chapter are no longer protected wetlands, but remain as wetland buffer areas under this overlay zone. Wetland buffer areas that are legally filled under this chapter remain as wetland buffer areas. And it looks like that was a reference to an existing section. Is that correct?
So wouldn't it make more sense to just say a wetland that has been filled becomes a wetland buffer and is treated as such? Because isn't that what we mean?
I think so. I don't
That's what I'd like it to mean. A wetland that has been filled becomes a wetland buffer area,
Isn't that
is treated as such. Well, that's how I'm seeing it.
And that's okay.
Buffer areas
As
that
long as you-
are built under this chapter remain as wetland buffer areas.
It says wetlands that are legally filled under this chapter are no longer protected wetlands, but become buffers.
Well, am I reading this?
That's how I'm reading it.
The last sentence is wetland buffer areas that are legally filled.
Remain as wetland buffer.
Right. Mhm.
So
What are you saying?
I'm saying a wetland that has been filled becomes a wetland buffer and is treated as such in the rest of the code.
So
Yeah, that was my, my comment ER 20, with sort of a change of language there. Because the remain confused me, but I don't know if changing it to, but change to wetland buffer areas.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry, what's the exact wording now?
So a wetland that has been filled becomes a wetland buffer area and is treated as such. I'm not saying that has to be those words, but that's the intent.
Okay.
I don't know if treated as such is, ordinance language.
Can we, is remains, or becomes, or did you say becomes?
I said becomes a wetland buffer area and is treated as a wetland buffer area.
So under what conditions would you fill a wetland?
Often people will fill if they are trying to build on it. That is very, very difficult to do these days. DSL generally will stop someone from doing that, but once in a while a permit is issued to fill a portion of a wetland.
But doesn't our code somehow manage that as well?
Well, that's what we're trying to do is.
Right, that's what we're trying to
make it more
ensure.
clear. Yeah, just make it
Right.
more clear in our code. Because right now the code doesn't manage, it's sort of ambiguous now. So I thought that language made it more clear.
Yeah, it's actually this, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The one thing that does change is that you're also proposing changing the buffer from 5 feet, which this wording applied to, I think, originally to 50 feet. So probably a lot of these areas that they fill a little on the fringe would still be in the buffer by virtue of the fact we're talking 50 feet, not 5.
Yeah.
Les, did you want to say something?
Well, I was taking the second sentence a little differently, where it addresses buffer areas that are legally filled. And I was imagining that might be done to attempt to turn it into upland.
Right.
And this specifically says you can't do that.
Right.
So it seemed like to me that was still an important comment to keep.
Which one?
Well, it's the second sentence in that little section we're talking about. You're correct, exactly correct. Filled wetlands become buffer, but then it also says that are filled stay buffers.
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just.
Oh, that makes sense to me.
But I think that's the part that it's just made me realize that's probably going to be a very common situation now that you're increasing the buffer to 50 feet.
Right.
You probably are going to have a lot of buffer areas that were legally filled, but they're buffer areas now.
So then maybe we want to keep that second sentence as well.
I think so.
Okay, good.
People agree with that?
Yeah.
That's good. I think that's good.
Didn't understand it. Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, this is Keith. I think we're clear on the intent. We might tinker a little with the language to try and clarify what we all mean here, but I think we're good.
And clarifying language is always appreciated. You're the experts.
Well, we can be as confusing as anybody else, but if we can reach consensus on, yeah, we think this all makes sense, then we're good.
Word theme.
Is the, what's the ordinance reference, and do we need to retain that?
Which comment was this
Under
referring to?
E, so in parentheses at the end of the 2 sentences, it says ordinance 08.
I am not sure, to be honest.
Just It was in the section 1743.020. Just where it came from.
That section.
Yeah, so I don't,
Do we do that? Do we regularly cite?
I think if something's been amended so that we can refer back to the section and date in the ordinance when it was amended, correct?
We're gonna be amending everything.
Yeah, yeah.
We're gonna have all these parentheses.
Okay, well, we can.
Well, at that point in time, I guess at that point, everything's gonna go away because it's gonna be completely amended.
Right, there should be no need.
Right, right. And then as we would tweak it in the future,
Then,
things like that would be back in the language.
A note for internal resolution on that topic. Can we go to applicability?
Mhm.
This is a new proposal to clarify when these regulations apply. So maybe you want to read that section.
I think my brief question was what is meant by city maps? So there is a local wetland inventory, but there are also online maps that are wonderful to refer to, but I'm not sure whether they should be considered the official version that the city wants to refer to for what is wetland and what is not. So maybe we just, speaking of tinkering with language, just a little bit of clarity here, exactly what maps we're referring to.
Robert, do you have an idea of what maps we should refer to?
I would use the online public GIS system. I know what Mickey's referring to. There are a number of old, I don't know where they came from, maps that kind of live on the website. There's probably a bunch of stuff that should be cleaned up, cleaned off. And I do believe that there's going to be a revamping at some point of the city website. That'd be a great opportunity for us to deal with that and kind of make sure that what we have out there is current.
Okay. Would it be sufficient for us to say on the city's online public GIS system?
That would be sufficient, yes.
Can I ask you a question? Maybe I don't know if this is the right time to ask it, but let's say there was a lot that you were aware of that wasn't in the wetlands delineation, but you're looking at it and there's no doubt in your mind that it's a wetland or there's a big question about whether it is. What happens then? In other words, it's not on our maps and it's not in our wetlands delineation, but over time, it has become a wetland. What happens with that?
I thought there was a section somewhere in here, and I don't know if anyone else is familiar with it, but I thought there might have been something that indicated that if staff had some questions about a particular land and that it didn't appear, that I think a delineation could be asked for. We have to find that, but I thought I remembered reading something to that effect. I don't know if Mickey or anyone else
I'm not sure where that is.
yeah, but
I think we talked about if someone is proposing on a wetland lot of record as defined by the local wetland inventory or other delineations. But Steve, I think you're right that there should be an ability for city staff to request at least a wetland report to ensure that there aren't wetlands on a property before you go through the permitting process. So maybe that could be something that the team could figure out how to fit in. Because I don't think we have a clear place where planning department could actually request that de novo, without there being some other map or something else that first referenced that there might be a wetland there.
Okay. If we don't come across it in our review, we will think about there's something.
Right.
That's added. It's
kind of language to that.
yeah.
So I'm going to talk about administration. This is a new section to clarify how the wetland overlay applications will be administered and reviewed. It assumes that Article 2 will be revised to include a consolidated description of the 4 basic procedures currently used. A recommendation from the code audit calls for consolidating all procedural requirements in a new Article 2 and Type 1 through 4 procedural categories that correspond to the city's current review procedures. For example, a planning commission review would be a Type 3 process, And I want Keith to explain this a little bit because this is kind of, it's not controversial, but what is happening here is we're essentially kind of renaming the procedures so that we can, it helps us with the code, policy neutral code organization.
Okay.
Yeah, so one of the things we talked about with the reorganization discussion was that we would describe your existing procedures using a type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4 description or label to describe what it is you folks are doing now for different types of land use and permit applications. So a building permit and perhaps a routine sign permit might be a type 1 or administrative review where there's really no notice sent out and no real opportunity to appeal a building permit, that kind of thing. Then there would be a type 2 where the staff or the city manager makes a decision and provides some notice on different things. I think you have a few that work that way. And then many of your applications go through a type 3 process right now that either go to the planning commission or the design review board. And then finally, the type 4 procedures would be for legislative types of changes that would require, such as this ordinance amendment, that would require city council adoption. So those are things we're doing now, and we thought we could categorize those in this new Article 2 that's part of our reorganization, and then start using that description as we work through some of these chapters. What I'm suggesting here is we could just say it's a type 3 planning commission decision so that people are clear that it's not going to the DRB, it's going to the planning commission in this case. And then all of the procedural elements about what the notice needs to provide and how the hearings are held and all that sort of stuff would be in Article 2. Because one of the things, as you know, in your current code, you describe what the procedure is. Maybe when you're talking about site plan review or conditional use review, you describe what the process is in that chapter. And with the new organization, you would have that description done once for each of the 4 types of land use review. And then when you get to the chapter for conditional use, let's say, you would just say it's a type 3 process. And just to look to Article 2 to find out what the details are for what that procedure requires in terms of process, notice, and hearing procedure and so on.
Mike Bates, you had your hand up. Do you have something?
Hang on. Can you hear me?
We can.
No, it related to applicability and we're well past that. So I'm sorry. I should have just typed in.
Well, you can say something now.
I think I'll just, I think I'm fine right now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Do people understand what is going on?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
Marcy, with that first one, it mentions, type 1 city manager. I think a lot of this stuff has gone to, the planning department. I mean, if we can obviously go, I don't know if it's city manager or his designee or something to that effect, but I think this is typically done by the planning department.
Yeah.
Type 1, yeah.
Yeah. That could be how you'd like to define it. A lot of codes will just say city manager. And then when you go to the definitions of city manager, it says it could be the city manager or his or her designee.
Yep.
So we can work with you to fine tune how you'd like to express that throughout the code.
All right.
Right. Development and activities permitted. What Keith did here was he found, it's what I understand, that there was some of that kind of narrative repetition and where a table could make it a lot easier to see all at a glance. So he made a table to simplify He removed the reference to conditional use and shows most activities as requiring a type 3 planning commission review. So this was kind of one of those big changes that we made after consulting with the social group to make sure that we understood the intention. What the conditional use language, I think, was trying to achieve was just pushing these projects to the planning commission.
Mickey, do you want to take that?
I agree. That was the intent. I find this table somewhat of a problem because of this wetland lot of record column. So the wetland lot of record isn't really different from regulating wetland and wetland buffer area, and wetland buffer area, if you look at the table, are treated exactly the same in terms of how the review works. So I think it almost creates a confusion because it looks as though these things are different when in fact they're treated the same. The wetland lot of record, I think this is where we need to talk a little bit about definition of what wetland lot of record means. I think the way that the code has been rewritten right now, the purpose of wetland lot of record is to allow us to talk about the uplands when we are determining reasonable use for takings purposes. That's really the only real use of that particular term.
Right.
So the code itself, this wetland overlay zone, does not regulate uplands. We're all clear on that, right? But there are times when we are talking throughout the code about the fact that maybe there's opportunities for wetland averaging or for buffer averaging or buffer reductions when there is so little upland on the property that there's no reasonable use on the upland area. And so a reduction is necessary to avoid a takings issue. So we aren't regulating the wetland lot of record per se as a different regulation. We're regulating the wetlands that are on there and the wetland buffer that's on the wetland lot of record.
And I
You
think
understand?
Yeah, like a false distinction is what we're saying.
Right.
That it's making between the three of them, the three categories.
When going
Okay.
back to the narrative, then resolve that, or do we still have that
Right.
issue?
No, we don't have the problem if we stick with the narrative.
Okay. So I'll also indicate one of the other reasons I did the table was just to see what's the list of the things that we're talking about that we might allow and what the process is. And my thinking also was maybe depending on what you folks think, would we be willing to treat some of these things differently, particularly the buffer from the wetland for some of these items? Because like I mentioned before, we have a 5-foot buffer now, and that makes perfect sense. You would treat the buffer and the wetland the same because 5 feet is almost a meaningless distinction. But when you're talking 50 feet, that's a different story. And so I wanted to put these up side by side just so we could see and maybe think about, would there be some opportunities to have more flexibility in some cases in the buffer area? And if the answer is no, that's great. But that's part of the reason I did this, just so we could get it all side by side and see what it means. And I'm obviously not quite understanding what this wetland lot of record is supposed to be, so that could just come out of the table and not be a distraction. We could treat that differently, but that was part of my idea also, just so we could have that up there and talk about it. And then the terms that are in yellow are the ones that are used but not defined, and so I thought it'd be good if we understood what those are.
A wetland buffer is to protect the wetland, period. That's how I see its purpose. And so I do not want to see that kind of distinction. Allowing other activity in the buffer, because then it's not a buffer anymore. It just isn't. I mean, 50 feet is not big. 50 feet is not large. Actually, 50 feet was when looking at other ordinances in other jurisdictions, 50 feet was the smallest that we saw. 75 feet and up was much more common. So I don't see treating a 50-foot buffer, allowing certain things in it. It'll just no longer be a buffer. That's my opinion.
Say though that looking around at the 50-foot buffers that we have seen, I mean, your point is correct. 50-foot buffers is more typical. But when you look closely at what those places allow, they do have some distinction in how they treat development within the buffer as opposed to the wetlands.
So I'd like to see us not have those distinctions, but that's my opinion.
And so I'm not debating that part, but then we could just keep it simple and just say that the protected area is the wetland plus the buffer, and here are the rules. And then we could keep it simple that way.
What do you think about that, Mickey? Uh-oh. Did we Mickey? Oh, no. We lost
Sorry,
her.
I was muted. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
I think the only, well, two concerns, but first, there will be times that DSL needs to be consulted regarding activity within a wetland. That is different from activity within a buffer. So I think it makes sense to continue to maintain a distinction. Also, with regard to our priority system for impacts, yes, the buffer is very important. And yes, we want the same type of permitting process potentially applied. But if we have a structure that we know needs to go somewhere on a lot, because all of that lot is either wetland or buffer, the priority is to place that structure in the buffer area, not in the wetland. So there are times when those two areas have meaning that is different. And yes, as a fact of life, there will be times that there will be activity in the buffer that is allowed that would not otherwise be allowed in the wetland. I think Lisa's point is more about the permitting process remaining the same for each, not that they will always have this exact same activities in them. The same goes for utilities. So if a utility needs to go in, a utility line needs to go in, it would be preferable for that the line go through a buffer area that is not actually a wetland than to go through a wetland.
True, that was that chart of putting things first in the upland, second in the buffer, third in the wetland itself, if there's no buffer and no upland available. So that stays, but I was concerned that we were going to make additional distinctions over and above that chart, that priority list that would permit additional development in a buffer that we had not even, that we hadn't considered.
I don't think so, but I think that it's kind of subtle. And what Vicki is saying is really helpful as the large framing, where we on the consultant team are trying to add some detail to is precisely how do you do that? I mean, you can say that there, just as you said, Mickey, there are times when you will have to build in the buffer because there's no other land. So how precisely do you allow that? What's your criteria and your clear and objective development standards? That's what we've been kind of sweating over for the last few weeks, because that's it wasn't as developed as it needs to be for a code. I think we all acknowledged that, right, when we had our meeting.
Right.
So that's what we've been trying to figure out. How do we what's development standards do we get that we feel comfortable with, but they still make it really clear what, if that were the case, that you have to build there, what can you do and how do you do it?
Well, we have to allow, if there is no upland, we have to allow somebody to build a residence in the buffer, because they can't be denied reasonable use of their land. So we have to do that. And if there is no buffer and there is no upland, if neither of them exist, then we have to let them build in the wetland itself. And we have a whole list of things that we, of ways of constructing, limitations on size, et cetera, if you have to build in a wetland because otherwise you would be denied reasonable use of your property and you have a takings. So I thought that was clear, that priority list was clear, but maybe it's not.
Priority list is clear, and I should wait till we get to that section and let Keith and Ethan talk about it more, but I still think we're struggling with how do you make an administratable list of things? An applicant
We tell you guys.
have bills where here's how you have to do it, here's how you have to prove to us that you're doing it, here's what you have to show us. It has to be pretty detailed and specific.
Okay,
Dorian, did you want to say something? Okay.
but it could be to get to that end, correct? We just have to figure out how to do it.
Exactly, we're gonna get there.
Okay, okay.
It's doable. It's just not easy, so. I mean, it's like getting down to I think we've taken a good effort by you and we've cleaned it up, but now we're just down to this little like end piece, but it turns out to be the hardest piece. Maybe Mickey, you don't agree, I'm not sure, but.
So I had one quick comment, if I can sneak in. Well, maybe I get two. One is, although I understand the rationale perfectly for keeping them all type 3, I'd like to think that over time we'll learn that some of these things could be type 2. And not everything has to come in front of the planning commission, but I understand why we would want to start it that way. To maintain control. The one thing that, we may have addressed it if we drop wetland lot of record, but because I think under the code that we intend to go forward, if there is sufficient upland on a lot of record, it's still a normal development permit. Isn't that correct? Or did we change that? And so it really, the way I had read it to start with was, well, that necessarily wouldn't be a type 3 development permit if there was sufficient upland available, right?
Right.
Yes, you are
there's enough
correct.
room.
Right.
Yeah.
If you take that out, then that column out, then it was just a concern of mine. And I want to make sure I understood correctly.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of this with the 50-foot buffer, we got 50-foot lots, so.
There may not be anything with.
So we're gonna be running into this, on anything that's being developed. Yeah.
Given how few,
It's just something to be aware of, that you guys will be seeing lots of them, whether it's council, plan commission, because, like I said, lot widths are 50 feet.
but given how few wetlands lots there are left in the city, it's not like I don't think the planning commission is going to be getting one of these every week, every month.
No, not, I think you're right. But those are all the lots that are left to develop.
Yeah.
So yes, they will.
Yeah,
Yes, we will.
Do we know what that number is?
I don't.
We've mapped that, but we haven't counted all of that out yet.
Right.
Do we think it's above 20 or less than 20?
Oh, I'd say it's
Much
well
more
over
than that.
It is over 20.
More than 50?
I don't know. I'd want to go through and do the count.
Okay.
Right. And one other thing, and I'm sure this is something that we discuss further from a staff perspective and understand is, one of the things we talked about was notice. When notice gets sent out for the hearings and things like that, when this comes to plan commission and council, is the measure 56 component of this that talks about you may lose use or be able to build, more than what you are today. And so we will have to submit specific, I think, and we're going to clarify this, that we might have to define those properties. And then when the hearings are held, those individual property owners may have to receive specific notices that there's a chance that they may not be able to use their property based on the ordinance that are being proposed. So I would say when that happens, there's going to be probably significant individuals that come to the hearings to say, hey, this is an issue to me.
Wait a minute, but I'm not really sure, Steve, because we can't forbid, if someone only has a wetland lot, we
Right.
can't say you can't build on it.
Why not?
Well, because then it's a takings. You have,
And it's something that we have to like figure out, but what I'm saying is with the buffer. Right now, the buffer is 5 feet. The buffer is going to be 50 feet and you're going to reduce the amount of activity or use that they can now do in that buffer area.
that's true. It's going to change the way they build their home.
Right. So we, that's something that we may have to, look into, and those individuals may have to receive specific notices from the city that this ordinance is being proposed. And I would imagine that we'll have a number of individuals who are going to be very interested in that.
Or pissed off about it.
Yes, that's probably the way I meant to say it.
And by that same line of reasoning, if we miss somebody, they therefore have a reason to.
I think there's certain things that if you don't hit someone with a notice that you've tried to get, there's some leeway, but I guess if I'm an individual, I'd certainly take that, stance. But so it's going to be important for us when we're looking at that to maybe notice more than less, so we don't come into that circumstance.
Got it.
I was looking at projects that we've notified people of under 56 on, and sometimes cities will do it very conservatively, kind of proactively. It may not actually change, they still can build, but they still cover their all conditions. And so, yeah, they might over notify even on measure.
Over notify than under notify. Right.
So it's more just so the plan commission and council are aware of what, when we come to the hearings, there's going to be this other side.
Yeah.
So we might allow building on stilts, for instance.
I think there's and that's where Marcy's talking about is, okay, we've defined what types of uses can go where, but what is the specifics that you can do there? And that's some of the things that we're talking about in terms of trying to define further.
Shall we continue?
Sorry about that.
Absolutely. This is our chance to have the. So the next section is about applications, requirements. And this one, it's a new section. What Keith did was he based it on your existing site design review submitting requirements, but modified it to coincide with the wetlands overlay application. And he borrowed submittal requirements found in subsection J of the committee draft. They were moved into this section and added or kind of surrounded by the requirements.
Yeah, I think this is a good section. I think it's great.
All right, so now we're getting to the part that I think kind of where it's definitely doable, but we are working a lot on this section right now. It'll be the last piece that goes in that makes this VLCD and becomes the version that goes to your public. I just want to walk you through, or maybe I could ask, you want to walk them through the structure of the development standards that we're talking about?
Well, I can. So with the development standards, we just had it goes on for quite a while, and it just seemed like maybe we could distinguish between different types of activities in different locations, particularly development activities in wetlands and development activities in the buffer areas. And is there any I mean, we talked about the table up above that I'll rework or do something differently relating to the process. But then as far as what standards apply where, it seemed like there might be some distinction made between buffer and wetland. Based on Lisa's comments, I'm thinking maybe not very much, but we could do it that way. And so that was really the main idea here. So right now, the draft has all of the standards that you had in your draft, more or less untouched. They're just put in that place. And we're just trying to figure out how to organize that the best. So it's a little easier to read and understand what you're supposed to do if you're in a wetland lot of record, or in a buffer area.
Maybe I could just walk them through that outline that's in the cover memo. I wonder if we pull it up. So it's not, this is a good time to like depart from the messy version. Since this section is more still information.
Right.
In our cover memo on the third page, we go through the organization that, and we'd like to get, especially given this lot of record discussion, just now we'd like to get your reading on it. So if you could make those bullet points that are not in the text box, can you make that bigger? So the organization that we're talking about is, it would start with the general standards that apply in all or most cases, regardless of the location or the magnitude of the development or the wetland. And then the standards for wetland lot of record application. Now, maybe this is a moot point now. Maybe I'd like to hear from not. Then the standards for development and activities within wetlands, and then the standards for development activities within wetland buffer areas only. So these are mostly like exactly how do you develop, what are your construction requirements, et cetera, and what are the differences if there are any. And then lastly, the mitigation requirements or mitigation options. These are, I think we acknowledge that this was a developed section of the draft. There are things that you can do to allow, if you develop in one place and you can mitigate over here according to a certain set of requirements, that's something that we should offer in this code. So what feedback do you have for us about this general organization or this just general approach?
Talking about substance, you're just talking about the organization. Well, it makes a lot of sense to me as a way of organizing, and I think it's great.
Specifically, and it's subject to what Mickey might share with us, I think the lot of record concept is not very applicable anymore. It's confusing to me, and it always has been.
Yeah.
I agree.
Should we
So maybe-
explore ways to maybe eliminate the lot of record and just be able
Yes.
to cover it other ways through the other standards?
Yes, I think that might be the
Okay.
best alternative.
Again, so it's
Okay.
preamble. Yeah.
And I think there was a comment at some point about changing the wording around mitigation. I could probably find the exact page, but there was some proposed language in one of the comments for a different term, and I liked that alternative term.
Yeah.
I think Eric, you might have suggested it, and I can't find it right this minute looking through the copy I have, but I'm totally happy with having a section on what is mitigation, but maybe calling it whatever Eric suggested in his comments, because I think that was a good way to, a more descriptive way to describe it.
Yeah, I remember that too. It was great.
Page 17.
Do you mean Ethan?
Yeah.
Sorry,
I think-
Ethan, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I was like, yeah, I think it just had, it was kind of trying to tie it a little bit more to how the state refers to mitigation, and kind of splitting it apart from, there's avoidance and minimization. That's one thing. And then there's actually, trying to recreate something that you impacted elsewhere, kind of looking at that as mitigation.
Where is that comment? Is it-
17, page 17,
Okay.
ER 48.
Okay, I like that too, that distinction. So actually that changes the outline a little bit because it adds a subsection to mitigation.
Yeah.
Or maybe this impact of minimization measures doesn't belong in mitigation, it belongs. Maybe it's at the very top where we have federal standards that apply in all or most cases. I'm not sure.
I think there will be very little use for the term mitigation as Ethan's envisioning it, which would mean offsite mitigation, because that's not preferable the way that the code is the revisions are proposed right now. So most of what we're talking about is not going to be called mitigation anymore.
But here's something, I was just looking at one of the examples that we've been studying and Ethan marked it up because it has some, I think it's actually the St. Helens example. It talks about mitigating on that same property, like it's like super mitigating in exchange for building. It's like restoring, beyond restoring an area in exchange for building in the buffer. And it seemed that that was a option worth pursuing.
Right. And I think we would envision that is what we were calling mitigation in our proposed draft, but that is not off-site. So I think it sounds like Ethan was suggesting the word mitigation be used for off-site processes. Is that what you were suggesting, Ethan?
No, sorry, I probably just didn't explain myself well. But you can have on-site and you can have off-site, and a lot of the codes will put a preference towards on-site. And then it's, if nothing is available, then you look to off-site. And some codes even say, if you're going to do it off-site, then it's a higher ratio. So there's different ways of going about that.
So how are you envisioning the distinction between impact avoidance and minimization measures and mitigation? Because when I saw you making that distinction in a comment, I assumed you were thinking off-site for mitigation. So how do you envision the difference between those two terms?
Yes. So impact minimization and avoidance, I look at that as, I felt like here, there's that K mitigation, and then underneath that, it was talking about construction management practices. And to me, that, things like erosion control, fencing, and stuff like that, that's more impact avoidance and minimization. And then also, obviously, minimization is trying to minimize your footprint. So all those things are kind of that avoidance and minimization. And then the mitigation is, okay, you couldn't avoid. Let's say you had to fill in, you lost a tenth of an acre of buffer. So now the mitigation is you have to either first look on site for improving a tenth of an acre of buffer, or expanding the buffer by a tenth of an acre and improving that area on site. Or if you can't do that, then you have to look off site, preferably nearby.
Okay, that's helpful. That really helps.
This is Keith. Another thing to keep in mind with this part of the code draft, I was taking things out of your draft and putting them in the place where it most closely associated with the topic. And so when we have mitigation and then we're talking about construction management practices, in a way it's maybe mitigation, but that might be something that we will just expect of everybody to follow certain construction management practices, and mitigation would be something beyond that. So some of this stuff is still sort of it's a sort of the stuff that you had, and I'm just trying to get it in the subject areas that we can shape into more coherent sections.
To that organization.
Yeah, in fact, I think construction management was not originally in K, but I might be wrong.
That's certainly might be right. Yeah.
And I think that's why it's confusing here.
Yeah. I
Our
tried my
original
best
mitigation
I tried my
section was
best.
different.
Yeah, I tried my best to put notes in so you knew where the stuff came from. But you know, some of the stuff, it was just hard to keep track of every little thing that I was moving around.
And do we have to even address offsite mitigation, since it seems that from everything I've read, it's generally a failure? Have to even have it,
Why we have to.
permit it. I just don't see.
What do you think, Ethan?
Well, I mean, I think it's a case of you tried, if there's no opportunity for on-site, then you go off-site.
How could there be no,
and-
well, okay. Could you give me an example of where there might not be any opportunity? I'm trying to picture one and I can't.
Yeah, so I guess, and you might not be able to picture it because you have a better understanding of the local conditions, but I'm just picturing, okay, you've got a small lot. The existing, let's say the wetland isn't impacted at all. We're just talking about the buffer. And it's a really nice looking buffer, right? It's all native forest. And some of that has to be impacted. And there's no room to actually expand the existing buffer on that lot. And since the remaining buffer is all in good condition, there's no opportunity to like do invasive removal and plantings. So you kind of have to go look for opportunity elsewhere.
I see. Well, that's a good example.
And you know, some, you know, it's probably beyond, well, maybe I shouldn't say this. Sometimes there, if you can't do it on site, or if it looks like, you know, doing it on site actually maybe wouldn't be meaningful, you know, sometimes you can have a fee in lieu program, and then those dollars actually go to, you know, maybe a watershed council where they're going to work on a project that you have confidence that it's going to be successful, as opposed to a private property owner.
Okay, I guess my fear though is that people will opt to do offsite mitigation, saying, oh, well, there's nothing we can do here, way too easily, because doing, you know, just donating a bunch of money or you know, trees to a watershed council's a lot, you know, will allow them to do exactly what they want. So that's my concern. I mean, I think that the offsite mitigation has to be an absolute last resort, and a way to put that in the code that either the planning department or the or the planning commission has to determine that there is nothing else. In other words, I think the idea of doing offsite mitigation has to have extra protections to avoid people just paying money, essentially, to do what they want to do.
So it would be a level 3 review as opposed to level 1, based on that table.
That mitigation would be level 3, I would say. Yeah. That might be a way to protect that from happening. I don't know.
Would it be valuable to have anything that helped explain what acceptable mitigations or remediations or improvements might be? I mean, it certainly is a question mark for me, and I don't know, maybe it's so site specific that it doesn't make sense, but I mean, like I didn't know that maybe replanting, you know, cleaning up invasives would be a mitigation. That's the example he gave.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just something I don't know about. I'd like to have seen a little bit more.
Yeah, and there are, you know, different municipalities address that differently. And I know our team is going to get together and we're going to look through some of those. I kind of highlighted different approaches, but, you know, it could be anything from, so for example, here in the Portland metro area in the Tualatin Basin, Clean Water Services, which is manages a lot of the water quality stuff in the basin, they actually require you to, even if you're not impacting the buffer, if you have to go through their review process, they require you to assess the buffer and either as good, marginal, degraded condition, and they have criteria for that. And if you're not meeting good criteria, even if you're not impacting the buffer, they still require you to actually remove invasives and plant with natives to certain planting densities. So they're very specific. And then if you're impacting the buffer, then you actually have to do more. But that, in contrast, when you're looking at like St. Helens, I think Florence was similar. It's only if you're actually impacting the buffer that they're requiring you to then improve buffer or do mitigation. And they specify, if I recall, just a 1-to-1 ratio of, so again, if let's say you're impacting 100 square feet of buffer, you have to find 100 square feet of buffer that might be in a degraded state, remove the invasives, replant with natives and stuff like that. So there are different approaches, and we can
And
certainly.
is that done in city limits? Within the city, it has to be done?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there, yeah, I'd like to see that ideas for fleshing that out, because to me, mitigation just means a payoff.
Do we have anything in here that says how much you have to, like, he's talking about the ratio for here? I don't.
No, that's what we're
Look at
working
it.
on. That's the piece that we're working on right now.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
But like Ethan said, we're gonna be in that spectrum. The clean water services to Wellington Valley example is kind of one end of the extreme, and I shouldn't say that the St. Helens or the Florence are, at another end of the extreme. That's not true. But they have right sized for their municipality, for their administrative capacity, how they can administer that. Clean water services, on the other hand, has a staff of people who do this. So that's an issue that we have to build into. Our goal for the hearing is to have this part finalized. And we're still going to be meeting with Steve about the administrative procedures. We could still incorporate an additional session with the original committee to review our recommendation.
Oh, I'd love that. Mickey, would you like that too? Trying to see if she's there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
But there still can be a discussion about just eliminating offsite mitigation.
Yes.
I mean, I just think of staff time alone would be.
Looking for easy stuff. Anyways, you guys can make it easy is what we're after.
I feel that it could still exist, but it has to be made the last resort, as you said. How is that done? I think we need to look around a little bit at how that. So I know that we're kind of at the end, and we're at the end of the draft. So if it's okay with people, we'll go away and finish this work, and we'll make sure that you get the clean copy that was submitted to DLCT. I can send that to Steve and he'll distribute it. Any last comments for us?
Just thank you so much for all this work. I mean, you've really put incredible work into this.
You're welcome.
And I really appreciate it.
The acknowledgement.
I do have a question, if we're done with the wetlands portion, to go back a little bit. You're going to talk about the compressed time frame and a speaker series and so forth. When you bring that back, can you bring us back a time frame or a schedule of some kind for us to work with, to know where we are at a given time?
And just to be clear, we're talking about housing, trees, and parking are the three besides wetlands. Housing, parking,
And so
trees.
the other ones, and that's done. So yeah,
Okay.
those are the three. I will do that.
Throughout this discussion, I've been thinking about the term social committee, and that's always bothered me. Why don't we just call it a focus group?
Oh, thank you.
Well, I got it.
Can we do that?
I got it from
Yeah. That's much better.
Yeah. I would feel better about that.
Yeah.
Feel in.
All warm and fuzzy.
I've seen. How do you feel about the original timeline that you had laid out to the city council? When you had started?
How many years ago?
We were supposed to be into adoption. And going into next year, we're close to ending it this year. I feel that the wetlands overlay work has pushed that out. And I do also feel that the public engagement will stretch it out,
That's my feeling as well.
but it's worth doing.
No, I completely agree. I have a bit of a different opinion about this. What they have in the past is that in a rush to get some of these done that we miss things. So
Yeah.
I feel very comfortable with being thorough and am quite pleased with the progress so far. I just was wanting to know, do you feel like we're stretching this on into next spring? That sort of thing?
If we do the kind of involvement that we are talking about, it will probably be spring. We will probably have the draft in the spring and then the adoption will start realistically.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
And
Here's my timeline, Counselor McCarthy.
What's that?
Here's my
There
timeline,
you go.
that I'll put it into
Okay.
a helpful graphic or something.
Oh, and we want to get this done. I mean, we want to get it done, but let's do it right. You know, let's not.
That's my concern.
Right, yeah. I think we have enough people watching over us that we'll get it done correctly as quickly as possible.
And I don't, I'm just speaking for myself here. I don't mind meeting more often, and I just feel like we've just had a lack of communication to know that there is anything going on. I realize the wetlands, but anything else beyond that, we have no communication about that. So we need to be kept up to date as to what else is going on with the code on it.
I hear you.
A lot of people think nothing is going on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I would like to thank the focus group for all of their hard work also. And the planning commission and design review and city staff and city council and the world.
Takes a village.
It does take a village. With a character or two in it.
Takes a village character.
Okay, so I think, we got a lot of them.
Just one thing, there's coffee with the counselors on Monday.
Oh, yeah.
I was just gonna start with good of you. Okay, so we got coffee with the counselors on Monday. This Saturday from 10 till noon, we have a work party in Forest Reserve. We're gonna meet at the cache site. 10 till 2, 10 till noon.
10 till noon.
10 till noon, working on invasive species. If anybody would like to mitigate any of those, come on. Anything
It's
else?
very cathartic.
It is. And we solve the world's problems while we're doing it.
So we wanted to talk about the tree meeting. If we wanted, Mike Bates had
Oh,
asked
that's
to do a meeting with planning, DRB, council and parks. So we need to talk about that, and I don't know if that's something you'd want to do on the 16th or a separate meeting.
We're not ready for it yet.
You're not ready for it yet?
I don't think so.
Mike, do you want to say anything?
I would like to set it out about a month from now. Yes. I would like to get on the calendar. We have a framework. We have language. We've spoken briefly with Steve. We're incorporating his changes. I think we'd like to expose the work we've done to a broader group. I don't know, Lisa, do you feel like we're pushing things too hard?
No, a month is good. I mean, but we have to meet more than once a month in order to do that. So we have to meet more often in order to get something that's presentable. That we're not just making, having them just sit here and spin their wheels. We have to really have something, good to
Of
present,
course,
complete.
of course.
So the focus
I think we
group.
Yeah.
So do you want to do that on the 16th when we do our next code audit meeting? Do you want a separate meeting?
I think the 16th is Well, I guess it is a month, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think we need a separate.
I think so. The tree is a
Separate meeting.
big issue. Yeah.
We have several dates to choose from.
So.
Yes, we
out of the
do.
Dates left that we have on hold. We're gonna possibly do the 9th with CETA. We've gone ahead and done the 16th for the code audit. Looking after that, there's 2 dates, the 17th and the 23rd. So if we'd like to specify one of them as the tree meeting. And I can send an email to the Parks Committee and of course DRB and planning.
So let's go with if it's okay with everyone, the 23rd.
The 23rd?
Give
Yeah.
the focus group as much time
Okay.
to
good
get it
idea.
ready. And be spectacular.
Okay, so the tree focus group will meet October 23rd.
Okay.
With the 4 groups.
DRB, Planning Commission, Council and Parks.
Yep.
At 6 P.M.
Okay.
Of course. Anything else for good of the order?
I have something, it was, he left, but anyway, I brought up a while back about people filling out a complaint form and that it was not anonymous. And then I was told that it actually is anonymous. Well, I saw the language and it apparently it does say that once the issue is resolved, it appears on the way it's written that the person will be informed as to who filed the complaint. And I don't think that works for filing a complaint. So I just think that the language, Bruce. So I'm thinking that the language, someone needs to look at that language and see if that's what it looks like to me as well as.
But the online form, if you fill out the online form, you do not have to put your name.
Right, but on the little, write-up about it, it says something about once it's resolved. I mean, can you fill that out as as anonymous and it's not a problem?
On a paper form, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
And I know on the online form you can, but we'll look into the.
Okay, so they need to be the same. Paper form and the online, that's all.
And Jen,
That's easy.
Thank you.
It's an easy fix, I think.
can't leave that field blank. You have to put something in it.
So you could, I mean,
Now you could.
say
It was
anonymous,
anonymous.
Yeah,
your business.
and I know because that didn't occur to me to do that, so I put my name, but but you can't just do it blank. It's not optional.
Okay, so we need to make that clear on the form because there's so much confusion from people. They're afraid to fill it out because they don't want their neighbor to know that they made the complaint
Well,
because
there could be something just at the very beginning.
it explains
The whole
that.
thing that's-
Just an extra sentence. That's all it's going to take.
If you want the code enforcement officer to have the opportunity to contact you and get more details, you need to tell them who's
Right.
submitting it. So maybe anyway. I
Solution.
think it's important that it doesn't get made public.
Oh, public
Yeah.
is what you're.
Yeah, well,
Public.
I think that's what Lisa's.
Right, or
bringing
to the
up.
person who you're making the complaint about. If I say my neighbor, the Smiths have bright light on all night and I make a complaint, I might not, in my case, I wouldn't care, but in most people, a lot of people would feel uncomfortable
Exactly.
having the Smiths know that their neighbor complained about them.
Mhm.
They would talk to the Smiths before they felt like they had to file a complaint, though. I mean,
Well, of course, if the Smiths are never there and you don't know where they live, it's really hard to talk to them. So, because it's a short-term rental, let's say, with the light on. So that's all I'm saying is that I think it's important that it's not made public or not made open to because what it's going to do is it's going to make people afraid to make complaints. That's not good.
But if it is a short-term rental, there's a property management or a person that
If they are managed by that. Sometimes,
they have to be,
because I'll just give you an example.
right?
I have a neighbor who I really like, but I see them maybe once a year because that's the only time they come down, but they have relatives come and stay sometimes and they've left a really bright light on, lights up the whole darn street. I don't know how to reach them. And I don't, because if I called them and said you left a light on, they'd probably drive all the way back down from Washington to turn it off. They're that nice, but I don't know how to reach them.
are
So-
they aware of the dark sky ordinance at all? Do you know?
Probably not. I mean, that hardly ever here. But that's all I'm saying is I might not want them to know that I called the code enforcement.
I understand.
That's all.
And get back. Oregon does have pretty open public records laws, so it could be because of that.
Oh.
And get back to me.
Okay. I just hate to squelch the ability to, you know, if there's bad, I mean, you know, if there's something happening that you can't feel uncomfortable reporting it.
Anything else?
One quick thing, just that everyone's here. The agenda for the packet will be for the 19th will be out tomorrow. We are waiting on one item with regards to the employee handbook resolution that's going to be on that. If it looks like it'll be any later, I'll go ahead and post everything and then we'll just have that hopefully on Friday. But we have the FCS group presentation ready to go. And I'm just waiting on that one answer on the handbook.
I thought the 19th was the water.
Oh, yeah, it's the water rates. FCS is the consultant. My apologies.
Oh, okay.
And we're.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So FCS group will do the water rate presentation.
Okay.
And we piggybacked on that for some employment handbook review.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Okay.
We're multi-tech.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Thanks everyone for all your time. Meetings.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right.